Thank you very much for kind introduction. My name is Sadao Nagaoka, and I am a professor of Institute of Innovation Research. And today we have a very group of excellent scholars from Europe and Asia, and we are very much looking forward to their presentations. So as mentioned earlier, the afternoon session consists of two parts, and first there will be 5 presentations of the research focusing on the structural reform of either Asia Pacific region or Europe. And I would like to invite each of the speakers and to speak for about 20 minutes for their contributions. So first I would like to invite Professor Kyoji Fukao, who is a professor and director of Institute of Economic Research of Hitotsubashi University. And his title of the presentation is Productivity and Growth Strategy in Japanese Economy. And he's going to introduce a very informative description of Abenomics in terms of 3 arrows. So, floor is yours.
So, thank you, Nagaoka-san. And I slightly changed the title of my presentation, Japan's 2 lost decades and Abenomics, and mainly on Abenomics. Today, I would like to talk about Abenomics and the structural causes of Japan's 2 lost decades. And firstly, let me briefly explain Abenomics. Abenomics consists of the 3 arrows, as you know, the Mikitani-san presented this morning, that is aggressive monetary easing and fiscal stimulus and growth strategy. And by the first arrow, the monetary easing, the Bank of Japan succeeded in making a yen depreciation and an increase in asset prices. However, there is still a large negative GDP gap, about 2% and, of GDP, and deflation is not over yet. And in the case of the second arrow, fiscal stimulus, as we know, because of huge government debt, it's more than 2 times of our GDP. Because of that, what the government can do in the long run as fiscal stimulus is very limited. So that's why the third arrow, growth strategy, is the most important part of Abenomics. And this arrow, the detail of this arrow is part of this policy is announced in June 2013. You can get the report at this web page. Focuses on structural reforms for higher long-term economic growth through boosting private capital investment. As a growth strategy builds for these acts, such as the Industry Competitiveness Enhancement Act and related acts on national strategic special zones, etc., will be submitted during the current diet. In addition, the government joined negotiations for the TPP, and government also plans cooperative tax cuts and investment tax credit. I think the direction of the government growth strategy is fine. It's okay. But the bedrock regulations still survive. For example, the employment system will not be reformed. And in principle, profit-seeking private firms are still prohibited from owning farmland, hospitals, schools, etc. And we also have prohibitively high import taxes on rice and other agricultural products. And also large-scale retail stores law still survive. So there is regulations to start up large-scale, for example, retail stores. And also, it is mentioned by Mikitani this morning, the regulations on online distribution of non-prescription drugs will actually be strengthened. So we have a lot of, regulations survive. Why Japan cannot reform the bedrock regulations? I would like to point out shortcomings of the present policy-making process. At Kasumigaseki is the place where the central government offices are located, most of the expert members of the Industrial Competitiveness Council, which creates growth strategy plans, are busy corporate executives, including Mr. Mikitani. And growth strategies are mainly drafted by ministries, and no real change from failed strategies of the last 2 decades. For example, ministry is eager to get their own budget. Their proposals lack objectives and a nationwide strategic viewpoint. And ministries are like independent countries, and there is no control tower. And ministries try to stop deregulations. And in the case of Nagatacho, Nagatacho is the place where the national diet is located. When it was in opposition, the Liberal Democratic Party did not establish its own independent think tanks. And actually, even when LDP was out of office, the LDP depended on ministries, especially METI, for drafting its campaign promises. METI is the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry. And within the LDP, each subcommittee of the Policy Research Council can veto LDP policies in the field it is responsible for. And ministries maintain strong ties with subcommittees in their field. So, Nagatacho program and Kasumigaseki program stops fundamental reforms. And I think in order to forge an appropriate new growth strategy, we need to understand the structural causes of Japan's 2 lost decades. So next, I would like to explain about the structural causes. This figure shows GDP gap, that is the actual GDP minus potential GDP over potential GDP by plain line, and the red dotted line shows inflation rate of consumer price index. And we can see that still we have huge GDP gap, about 2%. And by yen depreciation, the consumer price started to increase, became positive. But it is mainly caused by imported inflation, and wage rate doesn't increase at all now. So we have not to get out from deflation yet, from the viewpoint of wage rate, and from the viewpoint of huge GDP gap. There is a long way. We need to create more demand to get out of deflation. So basically, Abe's policy mix goes in the right direction, but we should create more final demand. And because of the limitation of fiscal policy, for sustainable growth, we need to raise the rate of return on capital through productivity growth, which in turn will stimulate private consumption via job creation and higher wage income. And we can understand this problem by this figure. So this figure shows the bold line shows the capital GDP ratio, real capital over GDP. And we can see that even in the lost decades, the capital GDP ratio increased over time. So compared with productivity, Japan continued to, although productivity stagnated, Japan continued to accumulate capital stock. And because of that, the rate of return on capital declined, and at a very low level for the last 20 years. And compared with Japan, United States have a completely different movement. In the case of US, because of ICT revolution and productivity increase, the capital stock GDP ratio declined over time, and the rate of return on capital increased over time. So what Japan needs is speed up of productivity. So monetary expansion or investment tax credit can temporarily stimulate investment, but we cannot continue that because already we have a very high capital GDP ratio. What we need is to improve our productivity. So next, let me discuss about how to boost Japan's productivity growth. This figure shows TFP level of manufacturing sector by blue line and non-manufacturing sector by red line. We can see that the TFP growth of manufacturing sector slowed down substantially after 1990. And in the case of non-manufacturing sector, our productivity stagnated for the last 40 years. But yeah, there was some improvement before 1990, but from 1990, there was almost no TFP growth. Why the productivity growth declined? In the case of manufacturing sector, one source of slowdown of the TFP growth is the market selection process is not the fact that the market selection process is not working. And this figure is the result of productivity dynamics. Using factory level data, we measure each factory's productivity and decompose all the manufacturing sector TFP growth into these factors. Entry effect becomes positive when new productive factories, which is more productive than average factory, starts up, then entry effect becomes positive. And the reallocation effect becomes positive when more productive factory expands their production. And within effect becomes positive when within each factory productivity improves, and exit effect becomes positive when less productive factories are shut down. And what we find here is, in the case of manufacturing sector, two factors reduced TFP growth. One is huge negative exit effect. That means more productive factories are shut down. The other is the decline of within effect. And in the case of exit effect, in Japan, the small and medium-sized factories, which are mainly owned by small and medium-sized firms, are much less productive than large factories. And these factories stay their production. On the other hand, productive factories, some of them are closed and relocated to China and other countries. And because of such relocation of productive activities, we observe huge negative exit effect. And in the case of within effect, the large firms and large factories, productivity growth was actually speeded up after 1990. The problem is small and medium-sized factories, productivity growth declined. And probably one hypothesis is, for example, in comparison with US, Japanese small firms doesn't do R&D. Japan's R&D is mainly conducted by large firms. And I think the small and medium-sized firms enjoy the spillover from large firms because we have close ties, network of supplier-customer relationship. So small and medium-sized firms could enjoy R&D, technology spillover from large firms. But because of relocation of factories by large firms, and also the supplier relationship weakened, because of these factors, the technology spillover from large firms to small and medium-sized firms declined. I think that's one of the main reasons of the decline of within effect. And this figure compares, the horizontal line shows the production increase by Japanese firms in Asia. And the vertical axis shows exit effect. And we can see that these sectors, like electronics and these industries, we observe huge increase of production in Asia and huge negative exit effect. So to stop negative exit effect, we need to stop this hollowing out problem. I'll skip this. So another source of Japan's low TFP growth is the stagnation of information and communication technology investment. This is the result of EU CREMS project, and my team joined the EU CREMS project and made, Japan's data comparable with European countries, major countries' data. And this figure shows ICT investment over GDP, gross value added ratio of distribution services. We can see that Japan's ICT investment value added ratio is very low. Also, Germany is not so high, and the US and the UK, very high. By the way, the Rakuten is not classified as distribution services. They are information service. They belong to information service industry. So Rakuten is not included here. And this is the ICT gross value added ratio of the non-electronics manufacturing sector. And again, we can see that Japan's ICT investment has been very stagnant. So Japan could not accomplish ICT revolution, which US enjoyed, simply because Japanese firms didn't do enough ICT investment in, say, distribution services and also non-electronics manufacturing sectors. Another problem I would like to point out is the increase of part-time workers. This figure shows the percentage of part-time workers in total workers in major industries. So in many industries, the percentage of part-time workers increased a lot in the last 10 years. And many firms do not provide intensive training in the case of part-time workers. So this change reduced training expenditure substantially, and it must slow down human capital accumulation in Japan. And why the increase of part-time workers is a problem? In order to examine whether firms employ part-time workers simply to take advantage of lower wage rates or to gain more flexibility in their workforce, myself and other scholars estimated both the marginal productivity of part-time workers in comparison with that of regular workers and the compensation of part-time workers in comparison with that of regular workers, using employer-employee matched data as a factory level. And what we found is that the productivity gap between part-time workers and regular workers is larger than the wage gap between part-time workers and regular workers. This means firms pay a premium to part-time workers in order to obtain flexibility of employment. So part-time workers are not exploited at all. But the problem is their marginal productivity is much lower than ordinary workers. And this makes it must make huge loss, economic loss, from the viewpoint of accumulation of human capital. The background paper is available at this web page. So let me return several slides. So we can point out that to explain that why TFP growth in the non-manufacturing sector being so low for such a long time, we can point out that slow selection mechanism like manufacturing sector, and also stagnation of ICT investment, and insufficient intangible investment like training, introduction of new methods, etc. And these are closely related with labor and governance issues. For example, in order to avoid changes in cooperative structure, employment adjustment, and training of workers, Japanese firms tend to choose to purchase custom software rather than packaged software. And custom software is much more expensive than packaged software, and each firm introduces different custom software. So there is no, network economy does not happen in Japan. And also, expected high closure cost of firms decreases incentives for startup of new business by all parties. And also, firms usually do not train their part-time workers, etc. So the problem of stagnation of TFP is closely related with labor problem. So this is the final slide. So what is needed to accelerate TFP growth? And probably most important policy is restructuring of the labor market and improvement of social safety net and enhancement of labor market flexibility and reduction of unfair gaps between regular and part-time workers. And also probably government should support human capital accumulation of workers, young workers. And also we need reform of bedrock regulations. And also we need to promote ICT and investment in intangibles. And also promotion of startup of domestic establishments by Japanese multinationals through improvement of regional logistics, FTAs, etc. are also important. So this is my presentation. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Professor Fukao.